You stand in a bright room surrounded by 30 children. They are sitting at long wooden tables, their small hands moving quickly, their faces focused and pale. Some are as young as 5 years old. You walk between the rows watching them work. They are not playing. They are not learning. They are laboring. Their fingers are nimble and fast, perfect for the delicate task in front of them. You see a girl, maybe 7, with bleeding fingertips. She does not stop working. She cannot stop. A boy beside her is coughing, a deep rattling sound that shakes his thin frame. He keeps working. You look closer at what they are making. Matches, thousands of matches. They dip thin wooden sticks into paste over and over, hour after hour. The paste glows faintly in the dim light. It smells sharp and chemical. It is poison, and these children are breathing it, touching it, ingesting it with every brush stroke. This is not a secret. This is not illegal. This is a normal factory on a normal day in a country that allows it. This was the reality across Britain and America during the 18 and early 1900s, an era when child labor was not only legal but considered economically necessary. Factories needed cheap workers. Families needed every member to contribute income just to survive. Children as young as 4 were employed in textile mills, coal mines, and manufacturing plants. One of the most dangerous industries was match production. Matches were in constant demand, used in every home and business. Factories produced them by the millions, and much of the work was done by children whose small hands could perform delicate tasks faster than adults. They worked 12 to 16-hour days in poorly ventilated rooms, exposed to white phosphorus, a chemical that made matches ignite easily but was also lethally toxic. Society accepted this. Parents sent their children to these factories willingly because the alternative was starvation. Authorities knew the conditions. Doctors documented the injuries and deaths, and nothing changed for decades because the system depended on it. Her name was Mary. She was 9 years old when she started working in a match factory. She lived in a crowded tenement in East London with her mother, grandmother, and 4 younger siblings. Her father had died 2 years earlier in a construction accident. Her mother worked 16 hours a day in a laundry, but the wages were not enough. When Mary turned 9, her mother took her to the match factory and asked for work. The foreman looked Mary over, checked her hands, and hired her on the spot. She would earn 3 shillings a week. It was not much, but it was necessary. Mary's mother hugged her and told her to work hard and do what she was told. Mary nodded. She had no idea what she was agreeing to. She started the next morning at 6. The factory was a long brick building with rows of tables under dim gas lamps. Mary was assigned to a station with a dozen other children, most around her age, a few younger. An older girl, maybe 12, showed her the process. Take a bundle of thin wooden sticks. Dip the ends into a pot of white paste. Lay them on a drying rack. Repeat. The work was simple but required speed. The factory paid by the piece, so the faster you worked, the more you earned. The older girl demonstrated how to point the brush by bringing it to your lips and using your tongue to shape a fine tip. Mary hesitated. The paste smelled strange and tasted metallic, but everyone else was doing it, so she did too. She dipped the brush in paste, touched it to her tongue, painted the match sticks, and repeated. Within an hour, her mouth felt numb. By midday, her tongue was tingling. By evening, her gums were sore, but she kept working because stopping meant losing pay. The days blurred together. Mary worked from 6 in the morning until 8 at night, 6 days a week. She stood at the same table, repeating the same motions thousands of times. Dip, lick, paint, dip, lick, paint. Her hands cramped, her back ached from standing. Her feet swelled, but the physical pain was manageable. What she did not understand yet was the chemical damage happening inside her body. The white phosphorus in the paste was being absorbed every time she touched the brush to her tongue. It entered her bloodstream. It accumulated in her bones, and it was slowly killing her. The other children knew. The older ones had seen it happen, but no one warned Mary because warning her would not change anything. She needed the job. They all did. Mary's personality changed within months. She had been a cheerful child, playful with her siblings despite their poverty, but the factory drained that out of her. She became quiet and withdrawn. She stopped playing when she got home. She just ate whatever food was available and collapsed into sleep. Her mother noticed but said nothing. What could she say? The family needed Mary's wages. Her younger siblings needed to eat. So Mary kept going to the factory, kept dipping matches, kept poisoning herself. She stopped feeling like a child. She felt old, tired, used up. And she was only 9 years old. The other children in the factory became her only companions, but they were not friends. They were fellow sufferers, too exhausted and sick to form real connections. They worked side by side in silence, each trapped in their own repetitive hell. Mary saw children collapse from exhaustion. She saw a boy, maybe 6 years old, fall asleep at his station and get beaten by the foreman. She saw a girl cough blood into a rag and keep working because there was no other choice. This was normal. This was legal. And everyone just accepted it. Think about this. Imagine being a parent who has to send your 9-year-old child into a factory where you know they will be poisoned, where you know they might die, but you do it anyway because the alternative is watching your entire family starve. Could you make that choice? And what does it say about a society that forces parents into that position? The dangers were not hypothetical. They were immediate and devastating. White phosphorus caused a condition called phossy jaw. The chemical accumulated in the jawbone and caused the bone to rot from the inside. It started with toothaches and swollen gums. Then teeth would fall out. Then the jaw itself would begin to decay, producing an unbearable stench and excruciating pain. Pieces of bone would break off and protrude through the skin. Infections spread. And many victims died in agony. Mary saw it happen to a girl at her table. The girl, maybe 14, had worked in the factory for 5 years. Her jaw swelled over a period of weeks. She complained of pain but kept working because she needed the money. One day she collapsed, screaming. They carried her out. She died a week later. The factory hired a replacement the next day. Mary kept working at the same table where the girl had stood. Mary developed the early symptoms herself. Her gums began to bleed. Her teeth ached constantly. She mentioned it to her mother, who looked terrified but said nothing. There was no doctor they could afford, no treatment that would help, so Mary just endured it. The pain grew worse. Eating became difficult. Sleeping became impossible. But she kept going to the factory because her family depended on her. She was 10 years old and her body was already breaking down. But here is what makes this even more horrifying. Factory owners and government officials knew exactly how dangerous white phosphorus was. Medical reports documenting phossy jaw and other phosphorus-related illnesses had been published for decades. Doctors testified before parliamentary committees. Activists campaigned for bans. But white phosphorus was cheap and effective, and alternatives were more expensive. So factory owners lobbied to keep it legal. They argued that banning it would hurt British industry and cost jobs. Politicians agreed. They prioritized profit over children's lives. And the factories kept operating, kept hiring children, kept poisoning them, all while society looked the other way. Now think about this. Right now, in this moment, there are products in your home made by children working in dangerous conditions in other countries. Electronics, clothes, food. You probably know this on some level. Does it bother you enough to change your purchasing habits? Or is it easier to just not think about it? Most child workers in match factories did not last more than a few years before their health collapsed completely. Mary lasted 18 months. By the time she was 10 and a half, her jaw was visibly swollen. The pain was constant and unbearable. She could barely eat. She lost weight rapidly. Her mother finally took her to a charity clinic. The doctor examined her and immediately diagnosed phossy jaw. He said the only treatment was to remove the infected bone. There was no anesthesia available for charity patients. Mary was held down by 3 adults while the doctor cut into her face and pulled out pieces of rotted jawbone. She screamed until she passed out. When she woke, her face was wrapped in bandages soaked with blood. The pain was worse than before. Mary never returned to the factory. She could not work anymore. Her face was disfigured. Her jaw was partially gone. She could barely speak or eat. She became a burden to her family, another mouth to feed but unable to contribute. Her mother got her younger sister a job at the same factory to replace Mary's lost wages. Mary watched her 8-year-old sister leave for the factory every morning, knowing exactly what would happen to her. She tried to warn her, but her sister had no choice. The cycle continued. Mary lived for another 3 years, but she did not really live. She existed in constant pain, unable to eat solid food, disfigured and ashamed. The infection in her jaw never fully healed. It spread slowly through her body. She died 2 weeks after her 13th birthday. Her family buried her in a pauper's grave. The factory that poisoned her continued operating for another decade before white phosphorus was finally banned. By then, thousands of children had been injured or killed. Society benefited from cheap matches. Homes were lit. Stoves were started. Cigarettes were smoked. And all of it was made possible by children like Mary who were legally sacrificed to keep production costs low. The matches Mary made are long gone, burned and forgotten. But the system that created them, the willingness to exploit children for profit, that did not disappear. It just moved to places where we do not have to see it. Mary's story was not unique. There were thousands like her. Children who worked in match factories, textile mills, coal mines, and countless other industries. They were legal workers doing normal jobs in a society that considered their suffering acceptable. They died young, lived in pain, and were quickly replaced. Their labor built the industrial world. Their suffering made modern convenience possible, and most of them do not even have names we remember. Mary is gone now. The factory where she worked has been demolished. The matches she made have long since burned. But the principle remains. Society still builds itself on the backs of the vulnerable. It just hides the process better now. Mary dipped matches for 18 months and lost her jaw, her childhood, and her life. And it was all completely legal. If you think child match work was the most horrifying legal job in history, there were others. Jobs that societies not only allowed but actively defended. Jobs that destroyed bodies and souls while everyone pretended it was just the way things had to be. And some of those systems still exist today.